Hey, good evening. Hey, guess what we got tonight? We got the female reproductive system. So stick with me. We'll be a good one here. Uh, First thing, though, I've had a lot of questions on the final. I'm going to post your final starting open Friday here on Canvas. So check your Canvas. Then you have almost 1 week. I think it's the next Thursday after that it's due, right at finals time. This exam, you have available your book, your notes, these videos. So do complete this as it is a portion of your grade. Anyway, let's start with the female reproductive system tonight. Start with compared to the male reproductive that we just covered. The male reproductive system is relatively simple. The female system is much more complex for multiple reasons. But first and foremost, because not only does the female have to produce sex cells or gametes that we call ova, but they also have to provide nutrition and site for development in the uterus for the 40-week gestation period. So when we're talking about the reproductive system in the female, this is going to add to the complexity of the situation. To start with, the external visible parts are pretty easy. You see there's an elevated fat pad. If you look right here, you can see the amount of adipose, yellow tissue here, is much thicker than as you go over laterally toward the iliac crest. But this fat layer, of course, forms a nice padded area here over the pubic bone because the pubic bone is directly below this, beneath this, deep. So for face-to-face intercourse, to be much more comfortable for both partners, it's important that the female has a fat pad here. And this fat pad is known as the mons pubis. And it is this region here that typically is covered with pubic hair of the female's anatomy, indicating sexual maturity. Now, the other visible parts are external portions. We will start with the labia. The labia, we used to call it majora and minora. Now we just say the labia major and the labia minor. Labrum, Latin, means lip. So literally it means the larger or bigger or smaller internal lips here. Now, when we look at the female anatomy, and of course my model always falls apart with my uterus falling out, but you can see the external portion or the lateral portion here, the lip, the labrum, or labia. This one, the lateral half is typically covered with hair follicles, so it has pubic hair on it, whereas the medial half doesn't. Then inside that, going closer to the vaginal opening and the urethral opening, is the labia minor. And the labia minor has no hair follicles at all on its surface. The labia, of course, enclose these two major openings into the female's body, as I was just pointing out there on the model. The vaginal opening, which goes in internally into the female's body, terminating the vaginal canal to the cervix or the uterus. It's usually plugged with a mucus plug to prevent organisms from being able to migrate inward. But the labia, of course, form an external protective device to help prevent materials and organisms from invading the female's body. Another important opening that they protect is the urethral opening where urine comes out. And I didn't point the two structures out, but put my model back together here roughly. You can see here, this is the opening to the vaginal canal going up here to the narrow neck region of the cervix of the uterus. And then you can see connecting to the bladder here, if I set my uterus out of the way, the bladder here is you can see the rugae in the bladder, the wrinkles just like we have in the stomach, and we find it in the urinary bladder for distension and stretching. But at the base of the bladder, we have an area where there's relatively no wrinkles, rugae, and we call that the trigon. Very commonplace for urinary tract infections. But you can see as the microorganisms would migrate up the urethral opening here, this is going to be about the first place in the urinary bladder that they're going to invade. So the labia, by remaining closed most of the time, are going to help prevent, well, just helps prevent invasion and other materials from entering this region of the female's anatomy. Another external structure that we can see, and I should have pointed it out while I had it all apart here, but we have this little, I think it's blue colored right here, structure. Now this model's really old. This one, they know a lot more about the shape of the clitoris now than what they historically did. This actually terminates right here and is visible from the external environment in the female's anatomy. But it actually goes in here, branches or bifurcates and splits, wraps around this area, and then makes contact with the neurons to the vaginal opening. So usually in that entryway into the vaginal opening, you have some very sensitive areas in the female's anatomy. And it varies from female to female. Historically, we called it a G-spot, which is an area that usually causes great sexual excitement in the female when stimulated in that area. So now we know that the clitoris looks nothing like this old model does, but my favorite structure, this structure, the reason I like it is its only physiological function in the female's body is for sexual pleasure. And so the clitoris, it's just for good fun. So when we look, the clitoris, and I alluded, if you watch the male reproductive videos, I alluded to the fact that the clitoris is basically just a small vestigial penis. Starts from the same embryonic germinal tissue as a penis does. It has the corpora cavernosa, which are the erectile tissues, which become engorged with blood, which cause the clitoris to elongate or become erect. And just like a penis growing and getting bigger, the clitoris with sexual stimulation grows and becomes erect. And when it becomes erect, it basically sticks out from this little tiny bit of skin here from the labia that go up and around it and normally protect it when non-aroused. And that tissue, we used to call the labial hood, but now we refer to it more correctly, because same as in the male, you can see the foreskin protecting the end of the penis, which is a very sensitive region in the male anatomy. This skin also protects the glans end, or tip end of the clitoris, which is a very neurologically stimulated structure in the female anatomy. So we refer to that as the prepuce, just like the foreskin in the male. So with the clitoris, these are your external features you can see. Now as you open the labia minor apart, the entire region that is bracketed by these structures is known as the vulva. And the vulva contains all the tissue surrounding the vaginal opening, the urethral opening. Deep below it are some glands that we refer to as the greater and lesser vestibular glands. But the rest of the anatomy of the female is internal. So I mentioned the glands, so I'll go ahead and write those down. But we have greater and lesser vestibular glands. Vestibular. And these are deeper in the tissue below the, you'd actually have to remove the labia minor and a little more tissue to get to reveal these structures. They're internal. But they basically empty or secrete their product, which of course does improve the lubricating quality of the entire vulva. So in preparation for sexual intercourse, this region is secreted with a material similar to the bulbourethral gland in the male anatomy that we talked about. We have going inside, what we're doing the glands, let me just go ahead and hit another gland. There's some scattered tissue here, and it's really hard to see in this model, but right here, there is a tissue right near the urethra in the female. Now remember, in a male, our prostate wraps this upper end, right at the base of the urinary bladder, start of the urethra, we have our prostate gland. But in a female, we have this tissue on down the urethra a little farther, and this is known as the periurethral gland. And the periurethral gland is also a very interesting structure. There seems to be not controversy, but not completely explained by science, all of its functions and how it works. It's synonymous or homologous almost to the male prostate. So sometimes it is referred to as the female prostate. But again, when stimulated properly, this gland will actually produce a projectile ejaculate. And so the female is capable of, upon orgasm, delivering a serous fluid material out the urethra. So it was commonly or historically mistaken for urine, but it is chemically different from urine. At first they thought that the female had lost bladder control with the orgasm, but that is untrue. It's a secretion of the periurethral gland. And so when properly stimulated, various females can produce copious quantities or amounts of this liquid material. With that, I'll stop and we'll start video 2.